Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Good Boxing Podcast with your host, Josh Size. Today I have a very, very good episode for you. As always, I'm going to keep it nice and short, and I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of fights that are happening. The main event I wanted to kind of talk about, and it's probably one of the most important fights in a while in terms of popularity, is the return of the old king, Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao, former 8-division world champ, former WBA super champion who recently just went into recess, which means he decided to relinquish his title rather than go on to fight Errol Spence. So he wanted some time to kind of figure out more or less what he wanted to do, and he didn't want to fight Ugas right away, so he ended up giving up his title to Ugas in order to satisfy that WBA requirement that if you're inactive for a certain amount of time, you have to relinquish that title and basically be in recess. So Manny Pacquiao basically was being waited upon to see who he would fight because, as you know, Manny Pacquiao is one of the biggest names in boxing, and when Manny Pacquiao fights, Manny Pacquiao generates a lot of income and revenue and buzz. So whoever wins the Manny Pacquiao sweepstakes is going to make the most money that they've probably ever made in their career, for the exception of maybe fighting Floyd Mayweather, or right now, based on the popularity of fighters, either Canelo or even Jake Paul. To be honest with you, you're making a lot of money if you fight Jake Paul, and you sell a lot of pay-per-views. I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but at the same time, he does generate a lot of money and, quite frankly, is one of the biggest draws in the sport. But this isn't about Jake Paul. That's another episode for another day. This is about Manny Pacquiao. Apparently, when I was going through the whole thing, there were 3 candidates potentially for Manny Pacquiao. The first one, as you remember, was Conor McGregor. However, after his thrashing at the hands of Dustin Poirier, no longer was that a viable option. People would not pay to see that, given the fact that Conor McGregor just got pieced up by an MMA fighter. Imagine what another lefty in Manny Pacquiao would do to him. Perhaps one of the greatest 147 pounders, or honestly, he's a really good fighter. He is one of the most decorated fighters in boxing history and has the most weight classes, so you can't compare him to the skill of Conor McGregor. Is Conor McGregor bad at boxing? No, he's not. He has some sort of talent, but he's nowhere near the top of the food chain when it comes to the hands in the square circle. So once he got knocked out, that was no longer a viable option. After that, another viable option was Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia had just come off the loss of Luke Campbell. It looked like he was preparing for a lefty, and then he was trying to call out Gervonta Davis. I thought that fight was a done deal because both of them mentioned that they would fight after the Luke Campbell fight no matter what happened. They had to settle that score. Ryan Garcia took care of business by knocking out Luke Campbell in spectacular fashion, and then you know the rest. Ryan Garcia went on the Mike Tyson podcast and was like, hey, I want to fight you, Gervonta Davis. I'm going to knock you out in 2 rounds. Everyone remembers the social media campaign. However, fights aren't made in social media or on social media. The promoters involved, there's a bunch of different parties involved. And then evidently Ryan Garcia came out and said that he was one of the front runners for the Manny Pacquiao fight. I thought this was a potential front runner because Ryan Garcia had said he did not want to fight Tank Davis, and that the Manny Pacquiao fight was a once-in-a-lifetime fight, and it wasn't going to be an exhibition. It wasn't going to be any of that. It was going to be strictly a boxing match. So I wouldn't have faulted him for taking the Manny Pacquiao fight, because when you take Manny Pacquiao, you are going to make a lot of money, and you are going to make the most money in your career, as I said, at least for right now anyways. Then all of a sudden, another front runner that I had mentioned before, I actually kind of predict this to be one of the people that could potentially win, and that was Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia is a solid name, doesn't have a promoter that he's strapped to, doesn't have a long-term contract with any one promoter, and can really fight whoever he wants on whatever side of the street since he's independent. Mikey Garcia is also not a big 147-pounder. His first test at 147 pounds was up against Errol the Truth Spence. He jumped 2 weight classes and decided to fight the best guy at 147. It was a very, very big fight. A lot of people bought pay-per-view, and honestly, Mikey Garcia took on too tall of a task. Errol Spence dominated him via points, and honestly, if the fight would have kept going, I think Errol could have stopped him, but I think Errol Spence was on on a mission to prove that he can box. He was on a mission to show that he's not just this come forward knockout artist, and that he actually does know the sweet science and can be an exceptional boxer. That's exactly what we saw. You saw Errol Spence outboxing Mikey Garcia, using his length, using his feet in order to escape Mikey Garcia's counters when he was trying to set traps for Errol. Errol's able to sniff them out, and he could not get any offense going. So Errol Spence pitched the pitcher perfect performance, and the rest is history. Mikey Garcia, in order to kind of make amends for his bad loss against Errol Spence, he ended up staying at 147 and fought Jesse Vargas. In that fight, you saw Mikey Garcia in the beginning start slow and then eventually catch his rhythm and would end up stopping Jesse Vargas, actually dropping Jesse Vargas a couple times, and then they would go to decision. I personally think that the fight with Jesse Vargas was very, very good. I thought it was a good test. It showed the fortitude of Mikey Garcia and showed that he can actually campaign at 147. He's going to struggle and probably can't do it against the best of the best, but he certainly can compete at 147 pounds. However, I think a fight with Manny Pacquiao, which is truthfully the reason why he moved up there, is what he was looking for. Manny Pacquiao is around the same stature as Mikey Garcia. If anything, Mikey Garcia is taller. He's the bigger man, in my opinion. Mikey Garcia is big for 140 pounds and is kind of tall even for 147. However, his body is not as tight and muscular as Manny Pacquiao's is. Manny Pacquiao is shorter. However, Manny Pacquiao's true weight, in my opinion, the weight that he could compete at the maximum ability and probably would pound for pound have the most strength, is at 140. So Mikey Garcia did campaign at 140, and I think it's a good matchup because Manny Pacquiao is not a huge 147 pounder. It's going to be the biggest payday of Mikey Garcia's career. And honestly, Mikey has been working hard. He's been taking on challenges. And I really, really wouldn't be too mad if he did score this matchup, because Mikey Garcia, again, was a good champion, doesn't duck anybody, will fight the best, and has had some career promotional issues, seemingly like many other fighters, and especially seemingly like fighters on Top Rank. Hint, hint. But hey, that's neither here nor there, and I'm just very, very happy for Mikey Garcia. Another fight I wanted to touch on is the development and the return of the great Andy Ruiz Jr. The reason why I say the great is because not many people win a championship in their life, and this man won 3 belts, right? Regardless of whatever you say, was it a fluke, was it anything, but he did beat the man that was the man in terms of ranking in a fair fight, knocked him out, and took his belts. Right, you already know the story. Andy Ruiz fell up short the next time he decided to step in the ring with Anthony Joshua, and Anthony Joshua did have a beautiful redemption story where he returned to glory. However, Andy Ruiz Jr. is not a scrub. He is a solid fighter who has solid hand speed, and I'm really, really excited to hear that he's back. Team him up with Eddie Reynoso, one of the hottest boxing coaches in the game, with Canelo, Ryan Garcia, Oscar Valdez, and Andy Ruiz Jr. It's one of the toughest stables in boxing. You have to give them credit for creating a team that could support and motivate one another to be great. And when you have that much greatness around you, some of it has to rub off. The main issue in Andy Ruiz's career has been motivation. And I think being around the best in the world, there's no other better person to kind of tell you what you have to do other than the best in the world. You can't blame the coach like Manny Robles. You can't blame Bob Arum. You can't blame Abel Sanchez. At this point, if you cannot succeed with Eddie Reynoso and the best fighter pound for pound, motivating you, pushing you to be great, stay in shape, and take it seriously, then you're just pure potential. And against Chris Arreola, who I gotta say isn't the biggest, isn't the best and most formidable opponent, but it is certainly a perfect fight for Andy Ruiz, given that he hasn't fought since the Joshua fight, and it would be his first fight back since then. Andy Ruiz isn't really going to want to fight a master boxer or someone like Tyson Fury or even Deontay Wilder right now, right off the couch. You got to get a couple fights in, see how your body settles with a new found weight loss, and I hope, truthfully, he finds his footing, because I want to see what he can do at the heavyweight level against the others. I mean, we got Deontay Wilder, we have Anthony Joshua, you have Tyson Fury potentially going to fight Anthony Joshua. You have a bunch of good fights out there that could be made, and Andy Ruiz needs to be in that mix in order for the heavyweight division to be truly deep and competitive. This fight's probably going to take place right before the May 8th extravaganza of Billy Joe Saunders and Canelo Alvarez. So that will happen April 24th. In other news, apparently, right, Lomachenko and Devin Haney are supposed to fight perhaps maybe in April or May, according to Twitter file or Twitter post. Devin Haney said he would be available in April or May, and then Lomachenko said that's perfect with me. I'll be available around then. That should be no problem. Now, if this is the case, bravo to Lomachenko, bravo to Devin Haney for number one. Devin Haney called Lomachenko out. Lomachenko answered the call, and then look, if Loma actually fights Devin Haney and Devin Haney decides to step in the ring with him, you immediately clear up whatever questions are made at 135 pounds. If Lomachenko loses to Devin Haney, it's clear who the number 2 in the division would be, and that would be Devin Haney. Ryan Garcia has not fought anyone at the level of, in terms of like pure notoriety and name, as Devin Haney. Sure, he fought Luke Campbell. Luke Campbell fought Lomachenko. Luke Campbell did fight Linares. He did fight a bunch of people, but clearly Luke Campbell was not the same Luke Campbell that stepped in the ring with Linares, who believed he belonged at the top level. You have to look back and look at that fight, and Ryan Garcia did win. He did dig deep. He did do a bunch of different things in order to win our hearts and say that, hey, this kid has heart. But if Devin Haney beats Lomachenko, in my mind, beating one of the former pound for pound, sure, it wasn't as relevant as Teofimo beating Lomachenko for all the marbles in terms of undisputed, but it does provide a clear picture for the 135-pound division, and I would love to see it. I personally think it's a good fight. Lomachenko is going to be the slight favorite, but I think Devin Haney certainly could hold his ground and actually might shock Lomachenko, believe it or not. And then finally, speaking on the other guy that I was just talking about, Ryan Garcia, apparently after that whole debacle with Manny Pacquiao, he's calling Gervonta Tank Davis out again and hopefully trying to make that fight. I really hope it's the case, because I think now what's going on is they really didn't know more or less what the boxing world was going to look like in terms of landscape, given the fact that COVID sure is on the way down, but it is not over. So they want to know more or less if fans can be there, if you can sell tickets. It's going to generate a lot of money, but it would also generate even more money if you can put fans, sponsors can bring their advertisements to the venue. You can get vendors, etc. People are going to want to go out, and these events are going to be very, very lucrative for the promoters and the fighters, especially if they get a percentage of that gate. So it makes it a lot easier to generate income to pay the fighters, right, if you have a live gate. So I'm hoping that's the reason why they kind of decided to kind of stay low-key. I know Gervonta Davis was dealing with some hand issues where he got into a sparring match and he went a little too hard in the paint with one of his sparring partners, where they almost traded blows and he almost broke his hand. So I just kind of wanted to touch on all these fights. I hope they all do happen. With COVID, you never really know until the fight's actually going to be made and they walk into it. I mean, there's so many fights that got postponed due to COVID or of things of that nature. So feel free to support the podcast on Instagram at Good Boxing Podcast. I post those episodes up on IGTV if you just want to sit there. Feel free to leave a feedback or any sort of engagement there. Thank you so much. If you're on Spotify, please feel free to follow. And if you're on Apple, leave a review and leave a rating. Thank you so much again. I appreciate all the feedback. I appreciate all the love, and I'm going to keep pushing. And I hope you like the audio. And let me know what you think about that as well, as I did upgrade the sound, and I'm still trying to find that nice little pitch. Thank you so much. Be well and have a great day.